So a while ago, someone reached out to me asking how they can debug a Node application in VS Code that has been generated with NX. Now the process is exactly the same as you would normally debug a Node app. So let's have a look. So to demo this, let me generate a new NX workspace. Let's call this my Node app. I'm using here the preset Node standalone, and then let's choose here Fastify for the sake of this example. I don't really need any Docker file for this purpose, so let's quickly set up a new workspace. Now, if you choose the standalone setup of Node, what you will get is not a monorepo, but rather just a single project. And so here you can see the source folder, which contains our Fastify application and a couple of configuration files, among which there is also an NX.json to configure how NX should process this workspace. Now, in order for debugging to work, we need to make sure that our project.json here, which NX uses to define targets, it's kind of like an extension of an NPM script, if you want, with more metadata. And so here NX has a build target that can be run against our Node app that uses a plugin. In this specific case, it uses ESBuild. And we need to make sure that we have source maps enabled because these are required if we want to actually debug our Node app. Next, we can just go ahead and set a breakpoint wherever we want to have the breakpoint. So let me go, for instance, into a root here. There's an API defined here at the top level entry point of our application. And let me just set a breakpoint in VS Code directly at the response of this API handler function. Next, I'm opening the terminal, and you can click that plus sign here and say JavaScript Debug Terminal, or you can obviously also use the command palette and just write JavaScript Debug Terminal here. And so once we have that, then we just run our Node app just normally. And so to run that with NX, either in a package.json, we just run the according start script, so npm start, or we can actually just use the NX command and running NX serve, which will now load up our application. You can already see that Visual Studio Code here already switches into the debug view. It is running at localhost 333. And so now, for instance, if I go ahead and open a new terminal here, where you run a curl request against that entry point, you would see that Visual Studio Code halts and stops at our breakpoint here. And we can just inspect our variables, the reply function, and we can just interact with this code. There's also the call stack function and everything else that you might need for properly debugging this. And this uses the built-in Visual Studio Code debugger, which is really handy because you don't even have to leave your editor at this point. We can then obviously just go ahead and then either step in or just let the code run through, and it would return properly the response of our API. So I hope this was helpful. Definitely also check out the video linked here to dive deeper into how you can use NX to modularize a Fastify application.